Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Hey, Lawson, we've been talking about enemies of gratitude. Hasn't it been fun?
Yeah, it sure has been fun.
We're looking at 4 enemies of gratitude. They are money, comparison, entitlement, and selfishness. Last week, we talked about money and its role in making us potentially discontent and ungrateful people. And today we're going to look at an enemy of gratitude called comparison. Comparison.
They can be tied together, money, comparison, but I think money is different. You know, the way we talked about it, that's kind of within ourselves, you know, within our own lives. Do we have enough? That sort of thing. This is different. Comparison, I think, is a totally different sort of enemy.
Man, it's so insidious. And to your point, they can be related, right? You can be comparing yourself to the economic wherewithal of some other person. I remember one time a friend of mine let me stay at his place on an island near Florida, not too far from where you live. And it was back in the days before Zillow, so you couldn't easily figure out the value of a home, right? Where of course now you can, but back then, April and I went and stayed at this place, and it was at the time, it was one of at least 4 homes I knew the guy owned, right? So I'm down at this home. Just so happened, the home 2 doors down was for sale. So April and I are walking one day, and I went, and it was with those days back in the day. If you're like over 45, you'll remember these days, you'd put a box in your yard, like physically a little metal box, and you'd stick it in your grass, and it had a lid, and there were sheets of paper in it that had the home profile. Like, people think there's no way that used to happen.
Right.
Yeah, that totally used to happen in my adult lifetime.
Came off of something what's called a printer.
And so I remember walking up to the little metal box in the yard of this house for sale, lifted the lid, I pulled one out, and I had to look around to find the sale price. $4.9 million. $4.9 million. I was trying to get the sheet of paper back into the box without creasing it. Like, I was afraid I was going to pay $5,000 just to look at the sheet of paper. And so we go to get ice cream or whatever, and we're sitting there eating our ice cream, and I'm running the numbers on, okay, let's say you got $4.9 million. Let's say you have a 30-year mortgage, which I'm sure people who buy $5 million homes don't have 30-year mortgages, but let's just say you did, blah, blah, blah. I couldn't afford to rent this thing for like 4 straight days, much less actually buy it, right?
Right.
But this guy's a good friend.
So what a gift. That was a great gift. Amazing
gift. It's tempting, though, to be like, oh, man, how come he gets a $5 million house and I just get to stay here for a week when it's just instant?
Yeah.
You know, it's like instant. Yeah. Instead of, to your point, man, I'm so fortunate that I get to stay here for a week absolutely for free. Like, that should have been my attitude. But my attitude was kind of like, how come he has a $5 million house?
Yeah. Have you ever had the thought, I'm asking for you to be authentic here.
Are you asking for a friend?
Right. No, like, seriously, you lead a ministry. It's been over a decade now, right?
Yeah. This will be our 11th or 12th year. Yeah.
You come in contact because of your role and because this ministry is great at raising money, and a huge majority of it goes straight into the ministry to serve. Have you ever compared? Have you ever thought, like, why am I slugging it out here in this ministry? And look at all these people with all this money. Does that happen?
Oh, it only happens on the days of the week that end in the letter Y. Oh, wait, that's all of them.
Really?
Yeah, man, for sure.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. The vast majority of the people I compare myself to are further down the tracks than we are in many, many dimensions, right? In fact, what's funny is we're going to close the first year. We're on episode, 53, 54 of our podcast. And we'll close the first year of the Father on Purpose podcast with, somewhere around 12 to 15,000 total downloads of the show, which on one hand, you go, man, that's awesome for 1 year. I know other podcasts, and I'm not talking about just like the Joe Rogan Experience. That's just a whole different animal. I'm talking about other kind of faith-based type podcasts where their first year, they might've had 20 or 50 or 100,000 downloads. And you find that out and just go, dag, man, what am I doing? What am I doing wrong? And how come his took off and all that? And it is so tempting for me to do that in the area of just me personally, for me to do that in the area of ministry type products, whether it's a podcast or a download. And Hunter, who helps produce this show, he and I look at our analytics all the time, and we're looking at like page views and traffic, and we're comparing it and benchmarking it. And some of those days can be pretty exciting. Some of those days can be pretty depressing, depending on how you look at it. And then I look at it in terms of book sales, right? I had one time, Dennis Rainey, super famous Christian radio and speaker, teacher, pastor, author. And I was on his show one time back in 2016. And he told me, he goes, hey man, remember, 95% of the Christian books that are published never sell 5,000 copies ever.
Oh my gosh.
And he goes, so if you ever have a book that sells 5,001 copies, welcome to the top of the mountain.
Wow.
That's amazing, actually. And so what's funny though, is if you look at someone like,
yeah, but it's hard to be content with that when you look at.
It is. You look at like Max Lucado, and I heard him on a podcast recently, and I think his lifetime total book sales, 150 million. You just go, man, and it's so tempting to want to compare and feel like you're way behind instead of just going, man, good for him. Yeah. He writes great books. Like, I'm glad 150 million people have bought one.
Yeah. And that's why we call it enemy, because it will literally suck the contentment out of your life, and it'll suck the gratitude out of your perspective by comparing. This verse that you threw into the show notes, 2 Corinthians 10:12, not that we dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who are commending themselves, but when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they are without understanding. The King James, but they measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves are not wise. And what I wish it had gone on to say is, they're not wise because when you do that, it makes your life suck. Right? It's like compare. And I do the same thing for the career path that has been taken. It's like, why did they get that promotion? I was I was literally standing beside them, and it could have been me. I did the same thing, same job. I'm just as good. In fact, I may be like, then you just go down this rat hole of why not me and why them. And man, I see it in myself. I've certainly seen over their lives, not as much recently right now in their lives, but with my daughters, that has happened too. And thank goodness that I didn't have to struggle as a teenager with social media like today. I think we I don't know if you're out there and you're 40 plus years old and can go down the trail of comparison of, well, back when I was a kid, we just didn't do stuff like that. We didn't talk like that. We weren't as entitled as this generation. Yeah, well, okay, maybe so. We were different, but I would challenge that thought process with, we also just didn't have so much marketing from the world and from this current culture we live in, blasting our face all the time with, are you enough? Is the question it's asking. And are you doing what this person is doing? Do you own the things that this person does? Do you look like her? It's hard. I don't want us to beat up this generation so much in comparison with ourselves to what we were back then, because it's a different world today. So just throwing that out there.
You found a really good Teddy Roosevelt quote about comparison, Lawson. What was that?
Yeah, he says, comparison is the thief of joy. I'd submit it's the thief of contentment, to be equally true. You think about, maybe you're rolling along and you are content and you're having a good day, good week, good month, whatever, good period of your life. And then come in contact with something that trips your trigger and you begin to compare, and you can sense the contentment draining away. It's that thief that just, maybe it doesn't come in one big fell swoop. Maybe it's just a slow trickle where that thief is just carefully, quietly, gently pulling joy, pulling contentment, pulling gratitude out of your perspective to the point that you become bitter and you become, malcontent with what's up in your life or what you have or where you are compared to, fill in the blank person, status.
Man. And what's interesting from a fatherhood standpoint, this takes on a different complexion when it's one thing for me to, in the privacy of my own mind, to compare my book sales to the book sales of, Max Lucado and be sad or frustrated. Having said that, when that starts to happen in a way where my kids hear of it, right? If I'm saying things like, well, our new book, Bring Your Hammers, only sold a couple thousand copies or whatever. And my kids overhear that. Or if I'm comparing, heaven forbid, right, my kids to other kids. Well, you had a good game, but I mean, shoot, Billy, he really held the team together. Billy was the man, and my kids start to see me compare my wife to other people, compare my family to other families, compare my income to other incomes, compare my influence to others' influence. What kind of signals and messages are we sending to our children, Lawson, when we as the dad fall into this trap and we give into this enemy of comparison? How does it negatively affect our kids?
Yeah, just listening to you say that, that just hurts my heart to imagine your child hearing you comparing them to someone else. It's different to say, yeah, I was really proud of Billy as well. Did a great job. Glad he's on our team. Good young person, really, really doing well out there. If you're agreeing with them or talking in the environment of like a teamwork kind of thing, and teaching your children to be grateful for others that also did something well, or maybe even better than they did. But I think the difference is maybe if you're comparing them in a way that is, they did that and you didn't, or you didn't do as much or as good, and not even with the intent of trying to tear them down, it'll do it. But maybe that's not even your intent, or worse, for them to overhear you. Maybe you don't know that they're listening. We've talked about it before. The words coming out of a father's mouth carry a lot of weight. If you're instructing and talking to them about something, that's one thing. But if they were to overhear you, that can break a heart.
And I think about even just what I accidentally teach my children by the way I am walking through my own life. If I'm constantly comparing whatever it is, my economics or my influence or whatever, in a way that's where I'm the loser, I'm always comparing to that guy I never compare myself to like broke people or to people who have never written a book, right? I'm always like comparing myself up. So I always put myself on the bottom end. It makes me so sad some days. And so if my kids see that as a pattern, they're going to repeat that pattern. That's an unintended consequence of you constantly comparing yourself as a dad. They're going to repeat that pattern. And secondly, what it basically says is, hey, God, thanks for nothing. So back to the example I used of the really nice $4 million home that I got to stay in, for free for a week or 10 days. If I'm constantly comparing and saying, oh man, how come I don't have a house like that? My kids, you know what they're hearing? I just am not grateful to God because God's given me a short end of the stick and he didn't deal with me fairly or appropriately. And it starts to plant this seed in their mind and their heart where they're very likely to do the same thing. They're very likely to get something. Maybe your daughter, like your daughter Lawson recently had a career success and you could be comparing her to this thing or that thing. And you could make her feel good or bad about that career success based on what you said above it or below it. Or your son might have come in, first in the state tournament, but in the national tournament, he came in 12th. And instead of telling him, way to go, man, you're the best in the state, you keep going, man, how does 12th feel? And you just continually lay those comparisons in front of our kids. It can do a lot of damage, not just to like their self-esteem, but even to their view of God and the blessings that he brings into their life.
That thief of comparison can sneak in. And the inverse of what you're talking about, I think, is true too. And it's just as unhealthy and dangerous to compare down. Like, I sure am thankful that my kids aren't like those kids, or something like. I'm serious. I'm being, kind of real here. I confess I've done it. I've done that where my children have overheard me say something that was comparing, whatever. Well, we aren't those people, or we didn't do the things that person did, and it's boosting us up falsely even. That is just as nasty. Comparison in any context can be unhealthy. And so I think it's fair to say to ourselves, let's, ask some challenging questions like how are we comparing? To whom are we comparing? I think about that, like, especially social media wise, and in some cases where people you just don't have much contact with, or it was a fleeting moment, but it stuck with you and it eats at you. Most likely they don't even know you're comparing to them, and if they did, they would not even care. They wouldn't care about you, but yet you're just tightly hanging on to this, if I only had that, or if I had only done that, and you're just burning up about this person. They don't even know you're doing it. And if they did, they wouldn't care about you. They're worried about themselves, so here you are just eating,
That's the truth. And, you reminded me as we compare down the story in Luke 18, where Jesus tells the story about the parable where two men go to the temple, and one is a Pharisee and the other is a tax collector. And the Pharisee says, "Dear God, I thank you I'm not like other people, these robbers, evildoers, and adulterers, or even like this tax collector." The Pharisee says, "I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all I get." But then the tax collector just says, "God, have mercy on me. I'm a sinner." And Jesus says, which of these two people went home justified before God? The Pharisee who compared himself down and was, arrogant, or the tax collector? And it's obviously the tax collector. And so I start to see in that parable one of the, we agreed we weren't going to say anecdotes. What are we going to say instead of anecdotes?
You're not saying anecdotes.
No, I just told an anecdote. It's from the Bible.
I'm saying, how do we guard
ourselves?
Thievery?
One of the things that keeps this thief away, if we use this parable from Luke 18, is humility. So, for example, this tax collector came before God in humility and just acknowledged his own sinfulness. And so the other day I heard someone bumped into a friend of mine at a coffee shop, and we were talking about a tough situation with some relationships we both are aware of. And he said something like, "Man, these kids deserve better. They deserve better, and they deserve better." And he kept saying the word deserve, deserve, deserve. And I kept thinking in my head, not really, man. We actually all deserve to go to hell. We all deserve. Here's what we deserve. You deserve everlasting punishment in a lake of fire. That's what we deserve. However, because of the grace of God and the sacrifice of Jesus on a cross, you don't get what you deserve. And so I'm grateful for not getting what I deserve. And part of that humility becomes one of those things, Lawson, that can guard against this thief who wants to come in and steal our contentment, called comparison. Hey, Dad, sometimes you need weekly encouragement on your father journey. That's why we built a community of men that are basically the Navy SEALs of godly fatherhood. They are all located at fatheronpurpose.org. That's fatheronpurpose.org. Now, that is a monthly subscription of just 11 measly US dollars. And when you join that community, you will get action items that are brief and biblical, and you can put into play right away. Every week, we release a dad mission video that is a short devo based on the Bible with an action item mission at the end, super practical. And plus, as a bonus, when you dive in, you get digital courses, ebooks, all kinds of other resources, not to mention you're connected with dozens of other godly dads who are walking through the same issues you're walking through. And that community is very rich and vibrant. Come check it out today at fatheronpurpose.org. That's fatheronpurpose.org. What are some other ways, some other practical ways we can help dads think about what can they do if they find themselves and they go, yeah, man, shoot, I compare myself all the time. And I always come up on the short end, and it's a major source of frustration for me. Let's spend the rest of our time talking about, to that dad, what are we telling that dad that he can do differently in the future to guard against this thief of comparison?
Yeah, I think you're right. The humility is, listening to that reminded me of a guy told me a story where he was at, I think it was like a Chamber of Commerce networking kind of thing. And there was a guest speaker, the CEO of some big bank, seemed like a great person. And afterwards, this guy, friend of mine, stuck around, headed up to the stage afterwards just to shake his hand and thank him for coming, tell him, I got a couple of things out of it. And, something that you mentioned about in your slides where you were comparing the banks in our community. Congratulations, you guys are being number 3. And it struck me how proud you were of that. But he told a story of his business and how he felt like he told this to that guy, to the CEO of this big bank.
Okay.
And he was telling him like, we're growing, we're in growth mode, we're doing this and that, but I just don't feel like we're doing enough or we're growing fast enough. And he was just being authentic, telling this story to the CEO. And rather than come back with, well, I hear how bad you think you're doing, let me tell you how great we are, one more time. Hit that, my friend's authenticity in telling this to that CEO kind of broke a wall down. And that bank CEO began to talk about not just we're number 3 and we want to be, number 2 or number 1. He said, he went down this road of, I feel like in my own life, I struggle with what is enough in my own, just my own life. And, I know these other people that have been more successful than me, and like, I should be celebrating. I think he was more like, I'm sorry if I came across as number 3 is not good enough, because I feel like this is something that I just generally struggle with. Forget about work, forget about the bank, just me. I struggle with this. And they got into this long conversation, like 10, 15 minute long conversation, became friends, invited him into a Bible study. Like my friend invited him into a Bible study, and they became like really good buddies because my guy was authentic, and was like humble. And that just shattered this wall of comparison between the two of them that they were each kind of struggling with. And I thought that was a really good, cool way that God used this moment for them to help each other.
Wow.
It was neat. Yeah. Another thing, I was on the phone this morning talking about this episode, something, this gratitude comparison as the enemy of gratitude with Tom. Remember Tom? Tom
from Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah.
Hey, everybody, be like Tom. If I remember right, go listen to our podcast. Wait a minute, you're already doing that. What was the other thing Tom did that was so great?
He had listened to all the episodes on his way to the gym, and that struck you as
went to the gym.
Yeah.
Yes. Be like Tom. Yeah. Number 1, listen to our podcast. Number 2, go to the gym. Number 3, send us a text telling us how great we are. That's what Tom occasionally does. Be more like Tom from Pennsylvania. Do it now.
Yeah. He's such a big fan, encourager of me in my life. And I just love him. He was talking about, is there an antidote over social media comparison? And something that he said that he's been trying to do and talking among his family members about is scripture only before noon. No social media before. And he and I over the past have talked about intermittent fasting as just a kind of a part of a healthy lifestyle, which means like skip breakfast, eat a later breakfast or an early lunch and let that be your first meal. And before that, stick with water, stick with black coffee, that sort of thing. And Tom used this idea of maybe you intermittent fast from social media, you delay it until noon. Like don't just wake up and grab your phone and start feeding your brain with the problems of the day, the social media of the day, and see, like, does that help? Does that help your perspective? I thought that was a really good input from Tom.
Man. That's great input, man. Just intermittent fasting. Also the authenticity, breaking down the barrier, sharing with other people that you're even having the issue with comparison can be, I think, really healthy, as you saw when the bank leaders had that happen. I texted a group of guys earlier this week who are in my kind of every other Tuesday, we get together on Zoom and pray together as a group, small huddle of about 4 of us. And I texted them and I said, hey, today, this was maybe 3-4 days ago, today I'm really wrestling with this idea of comparing. And it wasn't because we were doing this podcast necessarily. It's just that comes at me every now. Of these 4 enemies of gratitude, probably comparison. If I had to grade them, say too. Which one do I wrestle with the most? Yep. It probably is comparison.
Yeah, same here.
But it's not like I wake up every day and I'm rolling around in the pool going, my life is horrible. But it's just that it does occasionally come at me and I'll see it. And one of the things you put in here, Lawson, and I know it's a Bible verse reference. I can't remember what the verse is, but you put, we rejoice with those who rejoice. As an antidote to comparison, we got to go find those people in our life that are having success, or they have a moment, or they had a victory, and we need to rejoice with those people. Why is it so hard to rejoice with somebody when things are going well for them? Why is it so hard?
Yeah. My brother-in-law just got a new job, which is entailing them moving from one state to another. And now that it's come to be, we see God's hand and the timing of some things that have fallen into place, which is great. It has really helped them feel good about it. This is a big change for them, more than 2 decades in the same house, same state. This is a big, big change. And it's been rewarding to my wife, Audrey, and I to be celebrating with them, because we just love them so much. To see all this good kind of converge in their life onto this one kind of period of time here has been very gratifying. But I would say that's easy. We've known them most of our life. We love them deeply. It's not as easy to rejoice with those who are rejoicing over something in their life when maybe you don't know them all that well, or maybe you do know them and you're like, well, why them? Like, like what? Why? If the parentheses in that thought process is why them, parentheses, and not me, then I think let's check our motive on there and check our root cause for that level of discontentment. It certainly has happened to me. I've gotten home before where something happened good for someone and I don't know them all that well, but I just felt like, it's something I had wanted and they got it. And that means I'm not gonna. It's hard to rejoice with those who are rejoicing when there's something in your way. And so I think let's find what that something is. What is that thief of gratitude, of contentment? What is that thief placed at our feet, or maybe tangled our feet with, that's getting in the way of us being able to rejoice? Because when you do, it's actually very fulfilling for you. You mentioned what has just recently happened for Abigail. Great news for her. She's getting to go on this amazing, cool journey that's about to get started. And the people that she's going to be meeting to do it with, she's known before, and they're going to be coming back together. Man, they sent her videos of being in tears, happy for her, and these text messages that are just, they truly rejoiced with her. It was super fulfilling for my daughter to hear from other people who have very little, zero level of, you got that and we didn't. And so I'm a little salty about that. It was just nothing but we're so grateful that happened to you, that God has done that in your life.
And I've talked with guys before about the difference between a zero-sum outlook on life and kind of an abundance mentality of life. There's, for the things that really matter, so you might be in a company. There's a dad listening to this show and he's in a company, and there's only so many spots in the company above him he can be promoted into. It's kind of a fixed number. And, you look across your peer group, and of the 5 of you, 1 of you is going to get the promotion, which means 4 didn't, and so there's like this, if you got it, I didn't get it. And if I got it, you didn't get it. And there are some situations where that is true. I mean, there's some situations where if I got the promotion and my 4 colleagues didn't, then it is a bit of a loss for them temporarily. But for the things that really matter, joy, peace, contentment, those are not fixed sum amounts that if Lawson gets some joy in his life, well, there's less joy to go around. Or if Lawson experiences peace or you experience some kind of financial reward, oh, that means somebody took money out of my pocket. That's really not usually true for the stuff that really, really matters, right? So I can have an awesome relationship with my wife, April. And guess what? You can have an awesome relationship with your wife. We can both have that. And so I can be joyous for you when you and Audrey are doing great. And you can be joyous for me when April and I are doing great, because our joy isn't taken away from yours. It's not like we got in the cigar club and no one else gets invited. And so one of the things I love to try to figure out is, as we look at our friends and we look at the people with whom we should be rejoicing when they rejoice, is, do we really feel like, like your daughter, as an example, the opportunity she got has to do with her ability to act and sing and do lots of things that I can't do. So, for example, I don't feel like her getting that opportunity is taking it from Ken Evans, right? I have no dog in that fight, no dog whatsoever. And I just think that comes down to, do we believe that there's an abundance of opportunity, upside, and we can all share in that? Or do we think it's fixed? Every time someone buys a Max Lucado book, that means they didn't buy a Ken Evans book. Really? Is that how I view life?
There you go.
Give me a break. What do you think?
And another thing is comparisons. A lot of times they're just typically not true. They're not valid. What you're comparing to is something that you're just missing the mark. You don't get it. Like some conversations that you're privy to with other people, they're telling you just the surface little piece up here. Or like in social media, you're seeing the highlight reel. In our own lives, we see our extended documentary version of our life, with all the ups and downs and the uglies and the regretful moments and all that. But when you look at someone else's life, you're seeing a snapshot, and you're probably seeing only the best, most curated version of their highlights of their lives. So to help yourself feel maybe a little less lower than or less than or whatever, not enough if you're comparing, just remember what you're comparing to is probably not fully all that real.
Well, and maybe what we could do to counterbalance that, Lawson, is let's just commit, you and I, for the next month. It's mid-June as we record this. Let's go through mid-July, and let's just only post on social media all of our problems.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
Every time I yell at my kids, every time I have a frustrating moment at work, every time something happens that I'm unhappy about, let's just have I'll call it like the depression channel on Facebook, and I'll just continue to post. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. But that's true though, man. Can you imagine if that was like the case? Well, actually there are some people out there that you just scroll their feed and it's just nothing but bad news. But the point is, just don't worry about it. Don't compare. It's not doing any good. They don't know you're doing it. You're eating it yourself for no reason. Here's one more, and I'll throw it back to you. Maybe you can close this up here. The converse of comparison, or not, I guess you are still comparing, but part of a way to combat this is to know that, there's always somebody that has it worse than you. And this is a bit silly. I get this, but when I was 24, 25 in the Marines, we went to Mogadishu, Somalia. We were there for 6-7 months, and just the horror, the tragedy of what man can do to man, and these orphan kids and moms with barely alive babies, and there was just death everywhere. It was awful, awful, awful. But I've seen moms with a baby on the hip, barely alive, head kind of back, and another one she's dragging with the other hand, and they're literally walking miles to get water. And so when I find myself poor mouthing in my brain about some hardship or something, that image is seared into my brain. And so I don't know, for what it's worth, I do sometimes fall back, and I know I'm being silly here, but man, we generally have it pretty good on a lot of things, and I'm not belittling that, but also remember, and I guess the antidote within this is to list the things that you are grateful for and and focus on those and remind yourself it's very good for us, and it brings us closer to God. When you say thank you, when you list these things that you are thankful for, I'm thankful I can turn the faucet on and have all the water I want, But in a more serious vein, there are things that God is doing and has done in your life. Maybe we don't understand them all, but everything that he has in our life will be used for good.
Yeah.
Believe it. And so write those things down and see what God's doing in your life.
Well, we're having a blast walking through these 4 enemies of contentment and enemies of gratitude: money, comparison. Next week, we'll talk about entitlement. And then the week after, we'll talk about selfishness. So if you're an entitled, selfish baby, join us the next couple of weeks. Let me leave you with a parting word of scripture that's kind of our theme verse for this 4-part series on gratitude. And it's Philippians 4, verses 11 through 13. Not that I'm speaking of being in need, for I've learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound in any and every circumstance. I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. I pray that over the next week, your strength will not come from anything other than Jesus Christ. As Paul said in Philippians, that the secret to contentment is knowing that we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. Thanks for joining us today, Lawson. It's always a blast hanging with you. We'll see you next week as we talk about entitlement. Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in. Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.
You've been dozing off to the Father on Purpose podcast featuring Kent Evans and Lawson Brown. Now, wake up. Head over to fatheronpurpose.org for more tools that can help you be a godly, intentional, and not completely horrible dad. Remember, you are not a father on accident, so go be a father on purpose.